it again. So three main ways. It's using cycles or loops whenever possible. It works well for fire, for rising smoke, for waves. It works wonders for rain, for snow, background animation, all that stuff. Using exaggerated keys and using in-betweens close to keys, low frame rate, in-betweens close to keys, plus define physics. Like with debris that never fall. They just went up in the air, slow down, and never actually do a thing. So, using all of that, you can make your animation still look good while keeping it way cheaper. And there are a lot of ways to make this work. A good example of that, a good example of using keys and using all these principles were actually in the ASOCAN. So save the collab, save the ASOCAN anime, and there was an episode when they were trying to animate explosions or something like that, and there was a reference of just keys for explosion in the anime, and they went and explained it quite well. So let me grab it and we'll break it down. It's quite a long sequence. What? Okay. Oh yeah, it's when she takes the katana. And here we go. No, not you. You. When she tries to animate explosions, she says, use the fucking reference, you dude. Don't be a moron. Yeah, and we start here. And we stop right there. So it is a very limited animation, but it is done very well, and it works even within the show. I'll send it to the chat. I send it to the chat. You can post it in study reference. I posted in study reference. Yeah. So these are basic keys for explosion, and they're very good. So we have an impact, an impact, and it goes for how many frames? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then we have the impact. Here is also a build-up, so that's why it's a bit longer. The next frame is a huge acceleration of the smoke, which lasts for 5 frames. Then we start slowing down the smoke in terms of movement, and we go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frame again. Then for 6 frames or 7 frames, and slow down, both in terms of spacing and in terms of timing. So let's play that explosion from start to finish. So it starts here, or it ends here, it starts here. Even with that amount of frames, it still conveys all the information, because it has all the basic stages of the explosion. So it has the build-up, it has the initial smoke rising and expanding, and it has a slowdown at the end. Yeah, and does it feel choppy because the spacing is more or less right, The timing is also quite good. It's not very uh, complex in terms of timing, so you can see that we start with 6 frames for this shot, then go in 5 frames for this shot, for this frame, then 6 frames for this, 7 frames for this, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for this, and for this one. So they're basically almost evenly timed afterwards. The only difference is between the first 3 drawings, but they get the spacing right. And in terms of effects, getting the spacing right and the changes in form right is one of the most important things probably. Yeah, if you get the spacing right and if you get the form language and the form moving right, then the timing in effect it has to be right, but you have a lot of freedom with it, because in terms of character acting, there are certain ways people act out. There are certain actions that are faster, and we're very well observed. We know a lot about these actions, and you don't really see explosions in real life like every day. So, as an effects artist, you have way more freedom in that regard. Uh, that's why you can shape your explosion almost in any form and any way, because it's fast. It doesn't happen with you every day, because I know for sure that if you're, for example, an explosive specialist, you can definitely see that explosions in anime are hella stylized, and real life explosions doesn't even remotely act like that most of the time, and they're way more complex. But because most of the people don't observe explosions like every day, and even in movies, you don't actually see explosions like real life explosions in the movie. They usually use flame explosives, and flame explosives are actually not exactly explosions. So they're flame and fuel burning out. So it's not explodes, it burns, and it's different. And it creates a different type of scene compared to real life explosives. But we are so used to seeing this kind of explosions, flaming explosions in movies, that we assume that this is how explosions should look in real life. While in reality, most explosion doesn't look like that. Fuel burning out rapidly looks like that, but technically speaking, it's not an explosion, it's a rapid burnout of the fuel. But it's way more safe in a way, because when fuel burns out, unlike real explosions, it stops and it doesn't hurt anyone that much. So it's way better than the real explosion when you actually can hurt the people way more. For example, when they're creating mines and all that stuff, when they're distracting buildings, they actually reuse real TNT and explosives, and they don't create this menacing fire burning out. Yeah, yeah, they have way more smoke and debris than fire. But movie explosions are all like fire, 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 fire. Yeah, nowadays it's we have a lot of CGI explosions. So you can see from these kind of marks that we have a nice slowdown So we start quite fast, then we slow down, and you can see that these forms, these gray shapes, start going down. Yeah, take care. Gotta grab something to eat. Cake. Ham. Ham. And you can see that the masses and all of the details slow down as they go. So we've got a slowdown, and we also got this nice curling and billowing smoke going inwards as they go. And to spice it up, we have a secondary explosion. So we've got all these frames before, like how many frames? We started on the frame 39, like 40 to 89, like 48 frames, and then we've got a secondary explosion. And that spices up and catches our attention and helps us sell the explosion as something more complex, and also distracts from the fact that other parts are not that much animated. And again, it slows down. It's also very important to pay attention to the forms in the explosion, so the inner forms, because they create an interesting pattern and help us sell the volume of the explosion. Yes. So we've got a nice twist. This form forms a nice spherical shape on top of that, and it starts to twirl, to twist, and to rotate around the explosion. And the same thing happens with other forms as well. So for example, this form starts to go in this direction, slowly rotates inwards, and the brighter form slowly decreases and is sucked in and displaced with the grey smoke. Same thing happens here. So it goes here, here, and then from top it's also pushed inside. And then we've got a second explosion, and the second explosion pushes all the masses up again. So we had a slow down, so it was going slower and slower with each frame. And then we have a secondary explosion. So it slowed down, but then we have a secondary explosion, and the secondary explosion pushes the forms again. So it explodes again and pushes the smoke at the top again, so it accelerates a bit, and then starts to decelerate again. And it also pushes the forms at the center because it's just starting out, so it just haven't yet slowed down, and it pushes the forms at the center, pushes it, and pushes this in to the side. So it was here, it goes here, and forms a nice arc basically, and it starts to slow down as well. It starts to slow down and swirl. Yeah, be aware of physics and spacing. While essentially it's kind of the same thing. But yeah, Yeah, so this is using keys and good spacing to sell the explosion. Uh, However, these keys would need very good in-betweens as the forms are quite complex and the motion is complex. So it's not that it's just universally moving or evenly moving in all directions or expanding. So the in-betweener that will work with that explosion has to know how to in-between effects and has to be very consistent about it. Uh, it happens a lot with smoke and all that stuff, that keys are quite good, but the in-betweens, especially the shadows, are kind of floating because the in-betweener is not used to keeping everything super consistent, especially in terms of spacing, and spacing is essentially meat and bread of FX artists. And design, yeah, design, spacing, yeah, yeah, something like that. They go hand in hand because forms are influenced by physics, and forms are design is basically creating interesting forms. Yeah, so here we have a very nice explosion. It's a little bit easier. Yeah, everything's connected. So a very strong heavy explosion uh, will, how to say that, oversaturate the matrix of a camera and make it too brightly lit, so the camera can't adjust if the explosion is happening near to the camera, especially big ones, and that's why we can use this kind of cheat. So instead of using some impact frames or something like that, we can use just a white frame, and that essentially means that we're overblowing the brightness on the camera. So let's look at that explosion. So it overblows the brightness on the camera, and then we slowly fade out of that white. This is a very detailed explosion, but in terms of motion, it's a little bit easier to get because everything is kind of moving in the same direction. We just have to keep the forms consistent and keep the motion consistent. So let's look at the spacing here. We started up way in the air, and then we go, oh yeah, and that's another cheat. If we use impact frames or flash, we can skip the first part of the explosion when it just starts to expand and go to a more extreme degree. So if you use a heavy impact frame or a lot of them in succession, you can go from very small to huge almost instantly. That's the way that Nakamura and Yoshinari uh, use it quite well and quite a lot. So even in some of the explosions that we watched on the previous stream, when analyzing debris, it can be very obvious. And it's quite obvious here as well. So we go from nothing to basically this big, and it's already slowing down. And again, these forms are slowing down and going down on the form because they're experiencing air resistance, and air resistance prevents them from accelerating, and they slow down faster than the forms that go from the center of explosion. And again, these forms appear on the surface, they slow down, they go down, new forms appear, and so on. So that's why it has this kind of billion shape. Let's change the color because I don't like red on red. Okay. Better. So these forms go down by the form, new forms appear at the top, they slow down and then go down. So in terms of spacing, fuck. Okay, okay, okay. So in terms of spacing, it's mostly the same. We slow down just a bit in terms of timing and slow down towards the end as the explosion grows. So if we remove the camera shake, we'll get a slowdown, and again we'll get its forms going down. So this form stays here, slows down, goes down, goes down, and goes essentially beneath this big mass that constitutes the explosion. And if we are talking about big explosions, it's also important not to forget about shock waves. So there are like 3 shock waves from explosion, I guess, if I remember correctly. So it's one of them is because the explosion is hitting the ground. Yeah, it's in general. So in general, you can experience 3 types of shock waves with explosions. So there's a sound wave from explosion, there's a wave on the ground, they move at slightly different speeds. So the shock wave that goes through the ground goes faster because the speed of sound in solid objects is faster than the speed of sound in the air. Then there's a shock wave that goes through the air. This shock wave will go after the shock wave on the ground. So you'll first get a camera shake, and then you get a sound wave, and this is essentially a sound wave, a pressure wave reaching the camera. So we first get a camera shake, then we get a shock wave, but here it's not exactly that. We almost get them at the same time. Physically we'll have the camera shake first, then we have the sound shockwave. Oh, and the third one I don't remember exactly. There was an article about that. Gotta read that again. But again, 3 shockwaves that you can experience. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So first, so essentially, camera shake 1, first air shockwave 2, and the ground dust can be the third. Yeah, light, yeah, of course, light reaches first. Earth The sound in solid objects will reach the second, and the third you'll have the sound. So you'll first have to see an explosion, then you'll have to feel the explosion, and then you'll have to listen to explosion. Uh, there was a fun breakdown from VFX guys, VFX Artist React, when they fixed sniper scene, because in movies they don't get it right as well, because they usually do the shot, so the bullet of a sniper actually travels faster than sound. That's why you'll first see the bullet, then the bullet hits you, and only then you hear the sound of a bullet hitting you. And that's fun. So you wouldn't hear a sound of a sniper shooting before you get shot. Yeah, that's kind of fun. Fun physics. You listen, you dead. So it goes down. And again, these forms should follow the overall surface of explosion. So this is essentially an overall surface, an overall shape of the explosion. And then every scene on top of that follows that form. And the basic motion. Okay, bye bye still. I'm still recording it, so everything's okay. Returning to the topic of timing and spacing, let's look at the last one here and the next explosion. So here it is a car exploding animation, and it's very limited, but still fun. So as you can see, it is as limited as it could be. It is essentially like 4 frames, 4 drawings. So we use a cycle for the initial stage. So we first build up for the explosion, set the car on flame, it flames, we then swap the frames where the car is already starting to destruct, then again we switch to the initial frame, so it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, reusing the same frame again, then it goes 4, and that's it. That's really it. It's just 4 frames. You can, in between that, I'd probably add a frame or 2 at the beginning to spice things up for the build up. We can totally add nothing in between this frame and this frame and just add some follow through on the explosion, like 4 frames of almost the same timing and the same spacing, just to add some kind of slowdown at the end, so the explosion just doesn't freeze into one pose. And if you're using heavy camera shake and it's a giant explosion, that can work. It can work because the bigger the explosion gets, the slower it gets. So very big explosions, huge explosions, are actually quite slow comparatively. So they are not moving slower than smaller explosions, but because their size is so huge compared to the overall space that they take up, their speed is not that much. Yeah, I was talking about this explosion again as well. So it's basically the same as this one, and it's very similar in terms of timing and the concept. So let's look at that one. I really like it. I've sent it to you to share. I remember. So yeah, I've got a very slow build up, a very heavy build up, and it's very simple. It's just an ellipse growing into the car, grows bigger and bigger, slows down, spills out of the car just a bit, then goes full one, and it's on fifths, so it's 5 frames or even 6 frames, let me guess. So 6 frames, then we change it, and in between it just a bit, so it doesn't really change the form much. Then when we stop the camera shake, we add just a little bit more in-betweens on 2s and 3s to add this nice satisfying slowdown at the end, and ended that. So we've got a very slow, a very simple anticipation, build up, release, slow down. Essentially it's moving quite evenly at the end, but it's keeping the satisfying design language. And the camera shake is quite satisfying as well. We added just a bit of smoke at the bottom to make it more interesting and not to draw the ground distraction, because that would take time. And this smoke is quite easy. It's just flying straight to the camera. Yeah, and that's it. And that works wonders still, because shape language good, nice long build up, nice release. I also sent some. I don't remember all the references. I've sent some smaller explosion animations that I did on limited frame rate. I don't usually animate on limited frame rate because I don't need to, and if I don't have to animate on limited frame rate, um, then why try? At least, why do it all the time? Yeah, so I just do more stuff on 2s and 3s, sometimes on 1s for explosions. However, there are some advantages with working on very simplified and limited explosions. So when you're using camera shake, it's way easier to pull a good satisfying camera shake on an explosion, and a very limited explosion, because you can focus more on the camera shake and the forms moving, and the movement of the form doesn't distract you from the camera shake itself. Because if the smoke is moving quite fast, it can distract from camera shake. Okay. God, where is that one? If you see explosion, no, no. Same principle, very rough, very quick, something like that, something like that, something like that. Another thing is using camera. So when you are using camera and camera motion, it can also hide the fact that you're actually not animating explosion, because the camera movement kind of works instead of that. So it is basically the same as you can do with character animation in anime. So you can use camera motion, exaggerated keys, camera shakes, impact frames, to skip some parts of the animation and to still make it work even like that. So if you stick with me for next 3 to 4 minutes, I can. Does it work on any FPS? It depends on what you call work. So if it is a single part of the scene, probably no. So here it works, but it works because we have a character and something else in the scene, and because it is in between at the end. So even if this part, where the camera shake is the strongest, it has like very few frame changes. It doesn't change the frame until here. So 1, 2, 3. Doesn't really change much. It's barely in between. Then it goes on 3s, and that works. If you go in more than for 5s, and this is the start of explosion, it probably wouldn't work. So if you use something like 3s and 4s, it will work for bigger explosions. 3s will probably work better for a bit smaller ones. And when the explosion actually settles and slows down, you can use even 5ths or 6, like 4 frames per second, like something like that. But that's when the explosion actually starts to slow down quite a lot. It's also important to bear in mind that there are other ways of doing the same thing, but not doing the same thing. So usually the explosion doesn't happen like alone. It happens in the context of the scene, and you can use multiple explosions. And even if you stop animating one explosion after the second explosion appears on screen, it may work fine because you're all concentrated on the new explosion and you don't care about the old ones. So for example, if you have a scene and you have like one explosion in the distance and it starts first, then the second explosion, then the third explosion, then you can actually save up a lot of frames like they do in Azucan. They show that example as well, and that helps you again make it cheap but look good. So overlaying explosions is also a very nice thing. And given, so for example, there was a scene in Gurren Lagann when there are quite a lot of very simple spherical explosions. Gotta find it. And it works well because even if a single explosion is quite simple, there is a background, there is a moving ship, and there are many explosions, and each explosion takes some part of the scene, and even if it's not fully animated, at a specific moment of time there is an explosion happening and being animated, and that distracts you from all that stuff that is not animated. It's basically the same that they did in crowd animations. You can notice that in many animations, in many anime, background characters or crowds are not animated. But if you have just one or two characters in a crowd that are properly moving at a specific moment, it still feels kind of alive. It's cheap, but it's kind of alive. Same principle here. Gonna grab the scene. It's like when you remember a scene, but it's way easier to search it on Sakugabor than actually browsing the folders, because even if I have tags, there's just too many references to keep track of. Damn. Oh, I know what. Is it that one? Oh yeah. So it's simple, it's cheap. I wouldn't say that this is the best explosion animation, like never, but this works, and this works quite well for a very limited approach and for budget economy. Again, you can exaggerate poses, exaggerate, and then you can lower the frame rate without it feeling too stiff. Uh, and when I talk about exaggerating the poses, I mostly talk about exaggerating the spacing and the changes in form. So you've gotta push the motion even more. So if you just gotta make some explosions that just like gets bigger, not changing the form much, not adding new forms, it will probably look a little bit boring if you lower the frame rate. However, if you keep adding new forms and if you keep some kind of form change, it will still look bearable. It won't probably look excellent, but it will work fine. Let's look for that. That, 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 that. Yeah, this is also a nice limited explosion. It's not as limited as the previous one, but still. Hmm, hmm, hmm. Oh yeah, I've got some references to show hiding explosions. So these are nice from Rapparo. And you can see overlaying of explosions here. So let's break down these two and we'll go from there. So we're keeping the forms quite simple. So several impact frames, light traveling, and the shadow moving down, then coming to the center again, forming a very basic shapes and several rings. They all are timed slightly differently, so it creates a nice variety. We use a flash, then we change the form rapidly, create a nice interesting form. Don't keep this detail for too long, almost use a one directional motion. Then we use a very fast expanding on the smoke, so the smoke expands quite fast. For now it's moving on twos as it's just started moving. And in this case it's mostly economical because of the design, so it doesn't use many details and the action is quite simple. So the forms that move to the sides just slowly move to the side and that's it. Then we use new forms to replace it. They move it quite fast and replace the old form so that we don't have to animate it. And it still looks quite interesting. And then we just use this key. So this was the key and we use some in-betweens. And this is the next key. And this is the next key. The only part is the transition between these two keys, as yeah, this is kind of rough because it's basically no in-betweens and that's kind of strange. So this was the end of the CAD and it seems like the timing was pressing and they just had these two keys and they just didn't in between it at all. So it's just two keys next to each other, and that's why the end of the animation is very fast. So everything doesn't go smoothly all the time. So probably this is the first key, second key, third key, fourth key, something like that can be the fifth key, seventh key, eighth key, ninth key. Then we have this frame, and this is in betweens. Yeah. And this is the last key, and as the scene is ending, they didn't insert any in-betweens here. So it starts quite fast, and we use many keys. Then we here don't have a lot of keys at the end, because the explosion slows down, and we just slowly slow it down around the keyframe. I wouldn't say that this is the best keyed animation, but the keys are quite good. The in-betweens are okay. The best part is probably the overall design and the timing of the build-up and the design of the build-up. And this is probably one of the most important parts, is having a nice, good build-up to your explosion. And in this example, it's all about layering. So we've got the first layer. It slows down. We've got the second layer of explosion. Then we've got the third layer of explosion. It slows down. We've got a new layer of explosion. And every layer covers up the previous layer. So we're basically using 4 or 5 drawings for each layer, and we're creating quite complex explosion using a limited amount of frames, and it looks nice. And bear in mind that this is on like what, 8/4? No, this is probably the real time, 24 frames per second. Yeah. So this is on 2s, 2s, 3s, again 2s, 2s, 3s. So it's basically a combination of 2s and 3s, but we cover up new layer, but we cover up previous layers with a new layer every time. And I basically did the same thing with one of my explosions, where I just used the same explosion with slight variations all over again, and covered up the screen. And by covering up the screen, you make it work. Is this one? No, it's not the one. Is this one? It's not the one. It's this one. Yeah. So this one. So it's one explosion, same explosion, a little bit different explosion of the same kind. And it's all about layering and composition. So you can spice things up a bit, lower the frame rate, and it still will work. So something like this. And they do that a lot in anime. Layering, especially with smoke. They lower the frame rate, but use different layers of smoke to make it complex while still staying economical. It's all about economy. I'm trying to find the next one. Oh, it would be fun if someone would try to animate some kind of limited explosion on the stream. Oh, can I play the scene for now while I'm searching for the explosions? Yes, this is not the simplest explosion. But it doesn't really use a lot of frames, it's just very complex. In terms of frames, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames. So it's 6 frames for the actual explosion animation. Other frames are for the build up. And let's send that. Actually, this artist has a lot of good explosions. Fuck. I resize the window and I... Oh god. And it reloaded all the thumbnails. Let's play a game. Where was I? I can see a scene. Oh, this one is also good. Unlimited. I hate that. It just disappeared. Yeah. Come to me. How's the file is called? DCH. Amazing. Yay, I uploaded it. I don't remember the artist name, but he does amazing explosions. He's a web animator and he's Japanese. Ah, yeah, it's the one from Fate Apocrypha. It's Keys from a master. Oh yeah, we found it. Yeah, these pixel animations are dope. They're huge. And he has a lot of good explosions as well. So you can study those and keeping the timing right, keeping the spacing right, layering, all the stuff, that stuff works no matter if you use a lower frame rate or if you don't. But if you go for a lower frame rate, of course, making the poses more stylized and pushing the poses really helps a lot. Yeah, this is also a nice stylized explosion. It's quite limited, but still. So that one, I don't know, we can use some breakdowns. It's also nice if you have some changes in color besides changes in shape, because uh, as as the matter, as the smoke and all the stuff gets cooler, it becomes darker, and as whatever is in the explosion burns out. Oh, these are nice as well. Very stylized, very exaggerated poses, and very nice timing. God, I hate Explorer. Why can't you find it? Okay, any other questions? Or some specific ones, especially? Because I can talk about this for a long time, but essentially it's more about trying it out and understanding when it works, when it stops working, and all that stuff. Because saying that, if you keep that spacing and if you keep this timing, it will probably work out as one thing, but actually trying it out and yeah, more practice definitely helps, and you discover new ways to do that, to use less frames and be economic, especially if you have to, because usually when you're working on your own, it's not that much of a problem. It's just if you want to do more frames, you can do more frames. If you can extend the sequence, you just extend the sequence. It's a different thing when you're working for something because you just have to fit a specific frame rate or a specific frame count or a deadline. Yeah, this is nice. This is very exaggerated. It's not the best in terms of actual form language. It's too repetitive. But even if it's too repetitive, it still works in terms of timing and spacing. And it has a nice, very nice camera shake. This one. So it goes one, sharp change of shape, slowly increasing the volume of the smoke, very rapidly increasing the shape and slowing it down. So the keys are very close to each other, but it has a nice camera shake and form change. And this frame with this kind of glow also sells it. Sells the form change. Yeah, very simple, very effective. And it's pixel art basically. So yeah, this one is also quite simple. I wouldn't say that it uses a lot of frame cutting scenes. Uh, it's on threes for most of the part and goes on fours for the slowdown, so it's not very limited. But it's still in a more stylized design and works nice. So let me grab this one as well. So I was gonna try breaking down some character animation and basic actions. So I don't know if anyone is up to that. Seriously? Okay. So let's close all that. So, do we need this frame? I don't know. I'll just post it to the chat. And it's very basic notes. So I'll stop the stream for the